You mentioned earlier the question of what happens if this goes right. And I'm paraphrasing, but like, what does this look like, say, 5, 10 years down the line, even more, if this goes right? Could you speak to the practice of pre-mortems and pre-parades, if I'm getting the term correct?
Correct. It was actually a technique that I picked up from Larry Summers. So former Treasury Secretary Summers is on the board with me at Square. And he actually joined pretty early. He's been on the board for almost a decade with me now. And he posed this as a challenge to the management team at Square about, imagine things go incredibly well over the next 3 or 5 years. Actually write it down. Don't just think about it. Write down, what does that look like? What does success really look like? What does the company look like? What have you achieved? Which markets do we operate in? Which products have we shipped? Then go write a pre-mortem. Things didn't go the way you wanted to. What does that look like? And so we've taken that concept, we actually use it in our investment memos. So for every investment we contemplate, we write a pre-mortem and a pre-parade. And when we've had strategy offsites for ourselves, for the Sequoia Capital investment team, we did this too. We had a pre-mortem. It literally said 2030 autopsy of Sequoia Capital and what went wrong. What are all the things that are going to cause us to not be a great firm in the future? And the value of this exercise is, again, back to the insights from Don, it really crystallizes first order issues. Because you can spend all your time scurrying around doing all the busy work. If you're not focused on the things that will really compound and matter over the next 5 to 10 years, you're missing the boat. And it's the urgent, important trade-off. It's all those things woven into a very practical exercise.
How often would you do the pre-mortems at the Sequoia, I suppose, team offsites?
Probably every 2 years.
Every 2 years.
I think every year is too frequent because things don't change that often. I mean, we may revisit something if there's something that's really changed. Mm-hmm. There's a why now. Why now is one of the questions we love to ask. Obviously, it's like, why now? So, we made an off-cycle decision to open up in Europe, for example, something we hadn't done for a decade. We kept on thinking about, should we open up an office in Europe? Should we be on the ground? Instead, we kept on flying into Europe and we made some great investments. We were early investors in Unity and Klarna and several other companies on the continent. And at some point we realized there's just so much company formation happening in Europe. And especially after the global financial crisis, there's a whole crop of young people in Europe that now aspire to building companies when that wasn't the case before. So we revisited our assumptions and changed, and that was an off-cycle decision.
Let's dig a little bit deeper on the pre-mortems, specifically as applied to Sequoia. So let's just say you're at an offsite, and you can pull a real one to mind. And you're asking yourselves, imagine the venture business in 10 years' time. Sequoia is gone. What happened? Are there any answers that you can, brainstorms that you can share that prove to be very valuable in decision-making for the firm? Because I will say, for people who don't know the venture capital ecosystem, one thing of many that has impressed me forever, for as long as I've known about Sequoia, is the longevity of Sequoia. Are there any examples that you could give of pre-mortem answers that have proven very important in decision-making?
For sure. By the way, the long-lived, that the Sequoia tree is the longest-lived tree in California.
I do.
Right, and that's the reason that Don chose to name Sequoia Sequoia. It wasn't an accident. He wanted the partnership to outlive him with a lot of consequent behavior and actions. And he also wanted us to invest in companies that stand the test of time, which I think we've done disproportionately. So, there are a couple of things from the offsites. I think one of the most important ones is hubris. The downfall of every Greek tragedy and the extent to which we rest on yesterday's success. One of my favorite quotes is, no wreath wilts as fast as one that's rested on. We cannot rest on the past. And it's part of what motivated me when I joined Sequoia, by the way. The motto we have inside our building is, you're only as good as your next investment. And I saw that hunger and determination from people like Mike Moritz and Doug Leone, who clearly made it in life, and yet they were relentless in the pursuit. So very important for us as a team to think about hubris. We need to make sure that we continue to meet companies at the earlier stages of formation. So when you go back, if you think about the history of Sequoia's investments, when we invested in Atari or Apple or Cisco, we were the first investors. They were often single-digit numbers of people around the company when we first invested. When we invested in YouTube, there were 3 people. LinkedIn, there were 7 people. Palo Alto Networks, 1 founder in our office, incubating him. If we start losing grip of that early stage of being in touch with entrepreneurs right at inception, that's very dangerous for us. There's this temptation to then drift downstream and become a late-stage investor. And so that's probably one of the most important things we talked about in the offsites is we've got to make sure that we stay at the fountainhead of company formation.